Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Brandy Havens. I'm a full-time faculty member in the accounting department at the Forbes School of Business and Technology. I'm going to be the host of our session today, the lived experience of Jamaican transgender college and university students. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for the presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, we have enabled live transcription. So if you'd like to use that, click the live transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our esteemed speaker today. Dr. Nicola Campbell is a native Jamaican. She holds a bachelor's degree in health education, a master's degree in higher education, and a doctor of philosophy from the University of Arizona Global Campus. Dr. Campbell's affiliated with the Golden Key and Alpha Sigma Lambda Honor Societies and is a lifelong learner who believes learning can be fun. She is an educator who gives of herself unequivocally to meet the needs of her students. As one who believes in equality for all, Dr. Campbell is keenly interested in cultural diversity and inclusion. We are absolutely thrilled to have her with us today, where she's going to share her insights and passion for this topic. We want this to be engaging and interactive. I know that Dr. Campbell's going to be posing some questions for the audience, but if you have any questions for her, I want you to drop those into the chat. I'm going to be monitoring the chat throughout the session, and we'll get to as many of your questions as possible. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to Dr. Campbell.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for registering and tuning in to this presentation. I really appreciate it. I was kind of overwhelmed with the number of attendees, and so to say that I am a little bit nervous is an understatement. So thank you very much. As was stated before, I am a recent graduate. I was put in May 2023. So this is my first conference, and I'm ecstatic. I'm elated. We always talk about giving back to our community, to our field of study, and not just having a degree sit on the shelf. So I am really, really pleased to be here today. So just as an icebreaker, since the focus of my study was on the lived experiences of transgender college and university students in Jamaica, I thought, what better way to start off, having discussed this with my faculty advisor, this session by ascertaining from my audience how many of you have actually had the experience or the opportunity to visit Jamaica as a vacation destination. Okay. So it looks like it has only been Dr. Peterson. What was your take? How would you describe your experience? Okay, so many of you, not many of you have been there. Dr. Peterson says it's gorgeous and super nice people. So the culture is, I would ask, what do you know about the culture? But I would also think that from our interaction, you pretty much gain an experience or an understanding of what it is like. It's a very wonderful country. I'm not trying to, I'm not being biased, but at the same time, I'll give you this scenario. I had a friend of mine who is Jamaican. She went home. And when she went home, she decided to visit a dating site. She goes to the dating site and a red notification pops up, almost like, triggering an alarm to say, be careful. These people here are the country is very homophobic, very transphobic. Be careful of who you meet, where you go, and what you do. So this is not something that is generally is stated to the general public, but when you do your research, you will realize that Jamaica is one of the most homophobic and transphobic countries globally. So without further ado, as stated before, I'll share my screen. I'm not able to. It says host as disabled participants sharing. That's something
Brandy,
that,
do you happen to have the slides?
yeah. You want me to send you?
Yes, if you'll send me the slides, I'll project them for you if it's not letting you share.
Okay, sure. Let's see. One sec.
Deb, you may be able to make her a co-host if you click on the participants list and on the three dots.
Oh, I did earlier. Okay, now you should be okay, Nikki.
Okay, let me
I
try.
thought we did that before the meeting started. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, here we go. Are you able to see my screen? Hello? Are you able to see my screen? Yes?
No,
No?
it's
Okay.
not. It's not showing.
Not showing? Oh, man.
Going now.
Okay, here we go again. What about now?
There we go. It's come. There we go. We're all set now.
Okay.
Nikki.
Okay, so a little bit about why I chose this topic. The transgender community, from the literature is predominantly unseen and unheard. And students who identify as transgender are continuously experiencing acts of discrimination, marginalization, and victimization. And while the aforementioned is still a problem in the United States, it's even more a significant problem in countries like Jamaica, where there is little tolerance for transgender individuals. So I did identify a gap in the literature. And as I stated before, many of the studies were conducted in the US and North America, but there was very little looking at the issue as it related to the Jamaican context. So when I asked earlier how many of you have visited Jamaica before, what you know about the culture, predominantly and presently, Jamaica is very transphobic. It's a highly homophobic culture, and consequently, transgender students must consider their safety on campus on a daily basis. Transgender students are not only subjected to physical and verbal abuse from other students, unfortunately, they also experience some of this from staff as well. Several studies, again, I'll reiterate, have explored the problem of discrimination, marginalization, and victimization, but before my dissertation, no study had explored the issue as it related to the Jamaican context. But what I did find interesting is when I went to Google Scholar maybe 3 weeks ago to search for my name, I did find that another study was published at the same time, one that explored the issue of gay undergraduate men who were students at colleges and universities. And I found that when I compared the findings that the experiences were similar. So that has prompted me to undertake another study. The general problem in Jamaica is that there are no regulations addressing discriminations based on sexual orientation, resulting in harassment, marginalization, and victimization of transgender students or transgenders on a whole. The specific problem is because Jamaica is predominantly transphobic, there is a lack of support for transgender students. I, as a researcher and a member of the LGBT community, wanted to explore further the lived experiences of transgender students, specifically in Jamaica, because while I don't identify as transgender, as one who was a student and a member of the LGBT community, I kind of already had an idea of what was happening. So I wanted to gain further insight into what was happening as it related to transgender students. So why the importance of the study? Why this study? Exploring the lived experiences of transgender college and university students in Jamaica might be valuable to stakeholders at the post-secondary level. another significance of this study would be to increase awareness and showcase the problem of transphobia in Jamaican colleges and universities, and to shed light on how the experiences of transgender students impact their lives and academic performances. Additionally, it might awaken the need for policy change within the Jamaican university system. So the research questions, what are the lived experiences of transgender public college and university students in Jamaica? Some questions, how has the college or university experience affected the ability of transgender students to move forward in their degree programs? And how do transgender college and university students view campus students and support services? Now, I utilized or decided to go with a phenomenological design using purposive sampling, and ultimately, while I started off with that approach, I then found that there was a need to employ snowball sampling as well. So my participants were college and university students who identified as transgender and had completed they had to have had completed at least one semester of school. They were also students who had transitioned or were in the process of transitioning. The participants were recruited from social media groups such as Equality Jamaica, J-Flag, and Women for Women. I ultimately interviewed 10 students who gave their perception, their experiences as it related to them being on campus. The interview questions: how would you describe your experience with students, faculty, and staff? How would you describe your sense of inclusion on campus and in the learning environment? And regarding support, the participants were asked to describe the extent to which this was available to them from not only faculty, peers, but other members of staff. Data was collected by Zoom, and again, purposive sampling with manual coding used to reveal the themes. Data analysis began with the transcription of the interviews, which were ultimately and subsequently coded to reveal themes. Now, this is where I tried to kind of summarize my findings in order to respect the time that has been allotted. Because there was so much that came out of the interviews with the participants. The 6 themes that resulted were campus-wide discrimination, safety, the resilient and unresilient student, instructor and peer bias, mental health and psychological distress, and a culture of intolerance. What I found particularly interesting, I was aware that there was always the issue of campus-wide discrimination. There was the element of safety, but what I found particularly interesting was instructor and peer bias within the learning environment. So as it related to campus-wide discrimination, all participants reported that they encountered some type of verbal harassment, bullying, or discrimination on campus and in the classroom. The participants believed that the bullying of transgender students was based on a lack of understanding and knowledge regarding transgender individuals. The participants also described how exclusion and isolation patterns cause them to feel unwelcome and unsafe on campus. Regarding instructor and peer bias, in addition to navigating the campus, the participants shared their accounts and their experiences within the classroom, within the learning environment, and how both the experiences within the learning environment and on campus affected their academic success. There were several participants who shared that they wish they could come out to their lecturers. You know how sometimes we have our introductions They wish that during that introductory process, they could say who they are, what they are, and I can identify with this. I completed all 3 degrees with, Ashford University transitioning into University of Arizona Global Campus. And it was not until I got to the doctoral level that in my introduction, I stated who I was, what I was. And it was because I feared the ridicule, I feared discrimination, not just from my peers, but even more so from my instructors. And it wasn't until I think it was my master's degree where I came across an instructor who was also a member of the LGBT community. And he shared that this is who he was. He shared his family, and I'm like, okay. And I remember this was the first perfect grade I got. And even though I never shared who I was, subconsciously I was wondering, did he somehow see something? And I'm thinking, was this a coincidence? And so when I got to the doctoral level, I thought, I'm not gonna hide this anymore. I'm gonna take the chance, I'm gonna share it. And if for some reason there is bias, it's just something I'm going to have to face. But a lot of students are still reluctant to share this experience. And ironically, this also occurred, with me the concern was real because I also had experiences during my doctoral level that made me realize that there is still the element of instructor bias. I experienced this firsthand during my doctoral process. All the participants, male to female, shared that they received more harassment and bullying from male cisgender classmates when compared to female cisgender classmates. And this also has a lot to do with the culture of Jamaica. The culture is one where females are more tolerant of difference where it pertains to sexual orientation than males are. As it pertains to safety, participants share that there's a lack of trust and confidence in those charged with ensuring safety on campus. One participant shared that as a trans man, he was in an argument with his partner, and the campus security was driving by, and decided to stop to find out what was going on. When the security realized that this was a trans man, that is a female one who was born female and transitioned into male, his response was, and I'm going to translate it in standard English, as we use patois sometimes, was that's why individuals like you deserve to be raped. They saw rape as a corrective measure. And this is from law enforcement. Another concern of the participants was the safe use of the restroom. You can imagine someone who identifies as female born male. This person, when she walks into the restroom, cisgender females are looking at her as, why are you here? And the opposite for one who was born female, when he walks into a restroom, his fear is being identified as one who was born female in a restroom where there is male, and the issue of sexual assault or the fear of sexual assault comes into play. Fortunately, none of the participants shared that they had been sexually assaulted. Mental health and psychological distress, was a theme that was shared by most of the participants. When you think of all the 6 themes, they all contributed to mental health and psychological distress. Many of the participants shared feelings of loneliness and isolation. There was emotional pain. There were suicidal ideations. And this also was because of a lack of recognition. While they were seen as transgender, they were not, their gender identity, who they see themselves as, was not recognized. It was not accepted. Because of the bullying, feelings of rejection from peers, There was, again, as I mentioned, the element of emotional pain, which led to feelings of anxiety and depression. There was also the element of resilience or the lack thereof. One student shared that she withdrew from school. She said that she lacked the resilience to continue, and it wasn't until after she had sought counseling that she returned to the classroom years later to continue her studies. Other students shared that they had to find the resilience to continue. And while the culture of intolerance seems to be here by itself, it encompasses everything: campus-wide discrimination, safety, the instructor and peer bias. All participants were of the mindset that a lack of knowledge, and this is their perception and education, I wouldn't use the word education because we're all educated, but they felt that staff and faculty needed to be made more aware or knowledgeable of the needs of the transgender community. Participants believed that there was a great misconception and even fear that resulted in discrimination, marginalization, and victimization of transgender students, and that education regarding this population could make a difference. I would take the word education out again and say knowledge or awareness of this population could make a huge difference. Now, while schools are expected to provide counselors and staff, to ensure students' mental health or to equip them with the tools needed to ensure the well-being, all participants shared that this support was not readily available to them. The reasons range from discrimination to just not being trained on the needs of the population. Where the findings are concerned, before I move on, I wanted to kind of ask two questions as it pertained to instructor bias. I just saw the questions. I'm sorry, I'll get to them. It might be argued that unconscious or implicit bias plays a role in our perceptions of and interaction with others, including our students. For those of us who interact with students, how can we, recognize these biases within ourselves? Where do we start? Because we might say we are not biased. We might say we don't discriminate. We might say we are accepting. But how do we start with identifying these differences or these biases? And I think Debbie just answered it. Yeah, I think Debbie just answered. It starts with awareness and acknowledgement. We have to be aware that these biases exist. And once we are aware that the biases exist, we have to acknowledge, we have to acknowledge it within ourselves. Are we biased? We have to take like a self-audit. And once we do that, then we can address it. One might ask again, what are the impacts of these unconscious biases? I don't know if anyone wants to kind of offer some, to kind of address that, but there are impacts to the unconscious biases. And Brandy says, I try to see each and every student as a brave individual who is taking the next step, and they're brave and amazing as far as I'm concerned. Right. And I do have an example of the impact of unconscious biases or the unconscious bias. Think of the student who is so conscious about his or her gender identity or sexuality, whether it's LGBTQ or transgender. That student comes to class and he or she stays in the background. He or she doesn't want to be seen. And so he or she does not participate. It hinders participation and it hinders engagement. I remember a student said to me, I fear talking up because when I speak, people look at me. And also if the instructor has an unconscious bias, the student who is remaining silent, you fail to kind of force that engagement. And so that student becomes lost in the communication and sometimes decides not to turn up for class. Nicole says implicit biases impact our interaction with others. Yes, even if we do intend to negatively impact someone, if we do not know and address our biases, we will make someone feel unwelcome, and that will turn someone away. Exactly. And that's what some of the students shared that happened. As it pertains to the interpretations of the findings, the overall findings show that the participants of the studies were mostly, all of them, were negatively affected both at the psychological and academic level. Some students did not come to class, as Nicola stated. Some didn't participate in class. Without acts of resilience, some students were unable to implement coping strategies, and some eventually withdrew from school, resulting in academic or a reduction in academic success. Campus-wide discrimination revealed repeated patterns of harassment and bias that negatively affected the educational experiences of these participants. The participants were general consensus were continuously bullied, teased, and ridiculed, while others perceived the lack of tolerance. Which participants believed or perceived was because of a lack of tolerance and acceptance of their gender identity. Instructor and peer bias in the learning environment was one of the most, to me, a very important theme, with participants using words like self-conscious and tormented to describe a fear of being ridiculed, not just by students, but also by educators. Some participants expressed high levels of anxiety in the classroom based on instructor and peer bias, and this affected their ability to participate, engage, and interact in the classroom. Students spoke about being mocked, snickered at, and teased. Some students talked about not getting the support from instructors when they're being teased. Instructors would hear the snickering, the mocking, the verbal abuse, and it almost fell on deaf ears, as what one participant shared. Another one said she saw a smirk, and with the culture of Jamaica, this is probably or very high likely. When we once spoke of safety, there was the issue of walking on campus. Students were always on guard, looking behind their backs. They paid attention to their environment, a greater, attention to their environment. Some would just try to blend in and not draw attention to themselves. Students spoke about a safe space and a safe space to be themselves. Restroom was another issue, as I mentioned before. Imagine a trans man in a female restroom and a trans woman in a male restroom. The findings also revealed that the participants were, again, of the mindset that faculty and staff entertained preconceived notions regarding the transgender community. And this resulted in negative attitudes towards them. There was also some students who spoke about religious convictions. Individuals bringing the Bible in. This is not what the Lord intended. Look at you, they were attacked from every angle. The findings also revealed that a lack of awareness, again, we come back to awareness and knowledge by faculty and staff, made faculty and staff unaware or unable to recognize or identify behaviors that might be considered discriminatory or harassing. The lack of awareness also resulted in the reluctance of staff to intervene in situations that warranted intervention. A lack of support affected the safety, and it continues to, psychological well-being, academic performance, and completion rate of transgender students. What we need to also pay significant attention to is the repercussions, the mental health and the psychological distress that all of this has on the transgender student. The findings reveal that among transgender students, there was a general lack of support and acceptance from faculty, staff, and peers. This resulted in some participants, again, as I mentioned before, feeling isolated, depressed, and in emotional pain. What I found was important was resilience. The resilience for transgender students can be seen or was seen as the ability to overcome and to rise above the negative situations. Not many of the students were able to do this, but those that did were able to complete their degrees. These students demonstrated what I like to call stick-to-itiveness, and they were determined to complete their education. Some participants admitted to missing classes, as mentioned before, because they could not face the challenges that would come on a daily basis. These findings showed that a lack of resilience, which was evidenced by increased absenteeism, poor performance, and dropout rates, does affect the success of students. So, like I said, I tried very much to kind of summarize this section here, and I might have left some things out. I might have repeated some things, but overall, what came out of it is the support that is needed for students, the awareness and the acknowledgement on the part of educators. We need to realize what the needs of the transgender students are. We need to be able to put our differences aside, as with any other minority populations, and just think about the students first. Implications for theory and research. Again, it comes back to training and development. Leaders in higher education may identify proactive measures geared towards meeting the needs of the transgender student. And I found that a much needed proactive measure is support. It comes back to support. And this support helps to foster resilience, and resilience will help with completion rates and academic success. By becoming more knowledgeable about transgender issues, faculty and staff may be more sensitive to the needs of the transgender student population. Implications for practice. I do believe other studies should be conducted in Jamaican colleges and universities to strengthen the findings of the lack of ongoing training in the Jamaican higher educational system. And I was very pleased to have found that other study, even though it was not, the focus was not on transgenders, it was still on the LGBT community. And I was even more elated to know that it happened around the same time that my study was published. And it so prompted me to kind of do the converse. I'm going to, or I've thought about, since that study spoke about the lived experiences of Black gay men undergraduates, I have decided to look at the experiences of Black females, gay, well, the word is lesbians, in the community, and more so those who identify, as more masculine. Transgender students in higher education could benefit from emotional intelligence and resilience training programs, which would help develop confidence and the ability to overcome negative situations. As best practice, colleges and universities could implement training programs that include emotional management and improved communication skills. I'm trying to look at the comments. As I said, it's my first, so juggling back and forth is new. Jennifer wrote, Nikki, this has been so eye-opening and making me reflect on my own interactions with students and how my culture of care must be very inclusive of all identities. I'm moved, heartbroken, and grateful for you doing this research. What was one gap? No. What was once a, yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Letitia. Thank you very much. Thank you. So my limitations, the first limitation was the credibility of the participants. An incentive was offered. It started off at $20. Once I had submitted the IRB, this was decreased to $10, but still, with the exchange rate in Jamaica, this was, still something. The question arose, whether the incentive offered impacted the participants' decision to participate. A second limitation was the type of institutions. My focus was on public colleges and universities. The participants were all, from public colleges and universities. The researcher is a member of the LGBT community. I do have friends who are transgender, and so I had to be very careful not to allow the element of researcher bias. And lastly, the study being the first to examine the lived experience of transgender students attended a public college or in general, not whether it's public or private, it was the first to examine the lived experience of transgender students in Jamaica. There was limited information or previous research for me to go on. As a recommendation for future research, I thought that it would be interesting to look at the impact of resilience and emotional intelligence training in Jamaican colleges and universities on for transgender students. And also, I thought it would be interesting to compare the lived experiences of transgender college and university students attending a private college or university. And the reason is here, some private colleges and universities in Jamaica have adjusted enrollment policies to facilitate minority and non-traditional students, while public institutions remain hesitant to adjust to changes based on local student demographics. In concluding, transgender students attending a public college or university in Jamaica continue to encounter various forms of marginalization, victimization, and discriminations. These acts include a lack of tolerance, lack of acceptance, and a lack of support. And acts of marginalization, discrimination, and victimization will include or have included physical and verbal attacks, which can affect the mental health of this population. The lack of support is perceived to be because of a lack of training, lack of knowledge, and I want to include here a lack of awareness or understanding regarding the needs of transgender students. Addressing the perceived lack of awareness regarding the needs of the transgender student population through education and trans-inclusive curriculums. And this is something that I found as well. In the curriculum, there was not much mention of the population, whether LGBT or Q. And if the issue were ever brought up in the classroom, sometimes it was shunned. And so students believe that if this topic or these issues were included in the curriculum, maybe there would be an increased tolerance and support of the community, not just by students, but by faculty and staff. Additionally, by implementing emotional intelligence and mindfulness training, a result could be increased resilience of this population. And resilient students will have a greater chance of succeeding academically and thereby positively impacting student retention, academic success, and completion rates. Thank you. So, I did not get to all the questions, but I think at the end of the day, most of us are are in agreement that it comes back to, from what I'm seeing here, support, awareness, and acknowledgement.
Absolutely. And what a phenomenal research project. A huge thank you to Dr. Campbell for being with us today and presenting on this important topic. You know, here at UAGC, we are profoundly committed and dedicated to creating a learning environment that's safe for everyone, that's diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And so this is certainly something that's near and dear to our hearts. And this perspective was extremely valuable. So a big thank you too for our audience members for attending our session. We encourage you to attend the next session, which is happening right now. It is Developing Faculty Wellness in an Age of Open Access. So be sure to hop over there and enjoy the rest of your day here at TLC.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.